All right. We got some good attendance. Hello, hello, hello. Happy Thursday. I'm Ryan Galley, the CEO here at Icon. This is a continuation of our monthly webinar series. Today, we're talking about what I think is a very exciting and interesting topic. That's quite near and dear to me, which is AI, ChatGPT, and potential applications in senior living. So I got some exciting stuff to go through. Going to start at a high level, just trying to explain a bit more what it is. I think having that understanding is important to being able to recognize its technology's limitations. And also how best to use it. So we'll do a brief overview of that, some common applications of AI just broadly, not just ChatGPT. Some of the considerations or kind of warnings of things just to be aware of. The information generated by these generative AI programs isn't necessarily always accurate. So we'll talk about situations where that might occur, talk about potential applications specifically of ChatGPT in senior living. And then we have some exciting product stuff to share. This is not going to be released until next month, but we'll be able to show a couple applications of ChatGPT actually in our product. So that'll be a fun demo. I'm excited to show it off. So with that, let's just start with a bit about kind of the history of the tech here and what is NLP. NLP, that's natural language processing. In essence, it's just teaching the computer how to understand text. And it's not just the meaning of words, it's like the context. So where is a word in a sentence, the sentiment of collective sentences, and the intent behind the writer. And this is not new technology. Natural language processing has been around for years, and it's used in a lot of applications that people use every day. Very simple to try to understand how it's used is a simple example is with customer reviews. So you could use NLP to read through all the reviews and then try to categorize them as positive or negative. Another example, and this was actually my master's paper when I was doing my master's several years ago. I did a paper on trying to use Twitter headlines to predict or to show whether there was a relationship between headlines and daily stock returns, and actually the magnitude of the impacts. So trying to predict what the magnitude of impact might be based on a given day's headlines. So been around for a while. I think I did that was back in 2018. So to give you a sense of how long this tech's been around. Generative AI, type out, should say AI, is also not new. Generative AI it's combined with NLP. So if NLP is taking in the text and understanding it, generative AI is then from that generating coherent human-like text in response to a prompt. So I used to give a lecture on this years back. I think this again is like 5 years ago, and would use this example of generative AI at the time and how bad it was. And so for this, I used what's called a recurrent neural network approach, and I'll explain briefly what that is. But I trained this model on every Game of Thrones book, and then I would give it. You could give it a prompt, so say anything really, basically the start of a sentence, and it would write the rest of the passage based on the knowledge it had from training it on the Game of Thrones catalog. As you can see, it was pretty crummy. It looks like it makes sense, but then when you actually read it, it's pretty nonsensical. It says, Jon Snow, my love, her voice graceful followed hold of had across a glance, no Ned waddled, it goes on. It's pretty much nonsensical, but it looks at the time it looks pretty good. And so this was 5 years ago, and this is kind of where we were at that time. And then ChatGPT and OpenAI come along, and they really take it to a next level. But conceptually, the technology isn't that complicated. We'll talk through how we did, or I did this one back in the day with the recurrent neural network, and how that's kind of evolved today, and it is a bit more complex now, but it's conceptually really not that confusing. And it's actually quite interesting to understand this for future use cases. So, not looking at this crazy chart on the side, in the most simple terms, this is for a recurrent neural network. What it's doing is so you would take a ton of text. I had the Game of Thrones example. I fed those Game of Thrones textbooks through this algorithm, this model. And what the model would try to do is, based on we'll simplify it, based on one sentence in a passage, it would try to guess what the next sentence should be. The model then compares the actual sentence to what I predicted it should be with the model. And then in comparing those two and how off it is, it begins learning patterns. So if you noticed on the previous slide, and if we have any Game of Thrones fans here, Lady Stark, she's the mother of Jon Snow. And what you'll notice with the model is it was able to learn and pick up the context that Lady Stark, her pronoun, she's a female. And so you see it when it refers to her, it uses her. And so how it does this is, in predicting the sentences, it sees how far off it is, and then based on that, picks up on these kind of cues to make its next prediction better. So then you'd feed it another sentence, and it would try to predict the next sentence after that. And it keeps doing that, running through, trying to predict, and it's trying to minimize how off it is. And eventually you repeat it, you run it through all the text again on your training sample, and you get to a point where it's minimized as much as it can. It can't get any better. And it's almost like brute force in a sense of, you're just having this thing, predict, sample, predict, see how off it is, and rinse and repeat. And you would do this on and on again. And that's why the concept of having a lot of data is important, because the more data you have, the more you can train it, and the more it can learn and get better at prediction in a sense. So that was, and you understand now it's called a recurrent neural network, that concept of recurrence. This multi-layered approach, been around for a really long time. The limiter on it for a long time was computing power, because as we were saying, all this brute force that goes into it, that uses a lot of computation, and so that for a while was a limiter. So let's talk about ChatGPT, OpenAI, how they were able to make it almost like magic. So one, they had a boatload of data. They trained it pretty much everything on the internet prior to 2001. And then they did something interesting. Instead of using traditional recurrent network, they used what's called a GPT model. And that stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And again, in simple terms, mostly accurate terms, it's still doing the same thing, but it has this thing called an attention mechanism. So what that means is this model is able to identify the relative importance of certain text in making its predictions. So, think about, as an example, if you're in a loud room, maybe you're trying to listen, you're at a concert, you're trying to listen to the presenter on stage, they're saying something. What that person's saying for you is obviously a lot more important than whatever else is saying, all the other noise in that room. And so this model is able to actually pick up what is the more important stuff to identifying the context, and then putting less weight and kind of disregarding the noise. And in doing this, it gets much better at understanding context and meaning. And that's really how they're able to do this. A ton of data and the use of this GPT attention mechanism approach. So I think that we threw a lot at you. That's all the kind of more technical stuff we'll go into. Now we'll just talk about real world stuff and some of our product implementations that we're doing. So these are some common applications of natural language processing and generative AI. And a lot of this you've all seen and possibly just didn't know you were using it. So one is assessing the likelihood of a credit card transaction being fraudulent. Again, it's about, if you're using NLP, it's about prediction. So it's using data to try to predict something. And so this has been used for a while, trying to identify patterns in credit card usage. Certain transactions might indicate fraudulent behavior. Other use cases, generating captions for images. This is something we're looking at right now, but it's a great use case. They will take the context of the picture, produce something that's relevant. That's a generative concept there. Chatbots, again, that's another example that I'm sure everyone has seen. And the chatbots of the last 5 years haven't been great, but with OpenAI, you're going to see a huge improvement in the quality of these bots. And I know a lot of companies that are starting to work with this and implement. So that will all be coming soon. A traditional use case is translation, which is pretty obvious. Taking a word and trying to predict what it is in the other language makes a lot of natural sense for the use case. Another cool one, this is actually you would need computer vision, but it's tracking visual changes after a natural disaster. So looking at two images and trying to assess, the amount of damage to try to quantify claims. This also has been used for a bit of time in among car rental companies or insurers, where you can take a picture of the car and it'll try to compare what the car looked like before to what it looks like now to try to assess whether you've done any damage to it. So just broadly, those are some use cases. Some of this has been done to varying degrees of success. It's going to get a lot better, and some use cases that are more on the horizon. So before we talk about senior living specifically, let's talk about challenges and considerations. On the right here, this is old. This is from when I used to do this talk in 2018. I'm sure Microsoft's gotten it. I mean, I know they've gotten a lot better, but this was in the Microsoft OneDrive app. It used to, and still does, try to categorize your photos based on what it thought the image was. And it's actually an image of our dog in a sweater. And if you see at the top, it says it's a bird. So in 2018, it was still a little finicky. I'll give it to them that a dog wearing a sweater is not usually something that it's a bit more out of the normal, but I'd be curious now to run it through and see how much they've improved, because they've been pretty influential, and we'll see the enhancements they made to Bing are going to be quite huge. But challenges and things to be aware of, because this technology is definitely not perfect. And some of this, now you'll understand why I think it's relevant to understand how tech works. But so the first thing is it's dependent on the training data. A good example is if say ChatGPT was only trained on Game of Thrones, the information they give you is only going to be relevant to the Game of Thrones world. It's going to be missing everything else. And so you got to have that context in mind. So this was trained on all the information, but prior to 2021. So it means anything post that, it has no information on. That also means, jumping to point 4, that it's trained on whatever biases are inherent in the internet, which is really interesting. So if there's certain political, whatever it is, biases, the model is going to be trained on that, and that's going to be weighted towards its prediction more. And so the folks at OpenAI and ChatGPT have actually gone back and then manually tried to adjust their models to kind of overcome some of the biases that they identify. But the way that technology works, no matter what they do, there's going to be that bias that kind of creeps through. it's all dependent on the the initial data set. So it's almost like a reflection of society in a sense, or at least the internet society. To that point, the model might generate inaccurate or misleading information. Again, either because it's incorporating a bias or the information in the training set was wrong. So if you train it on wrong information, it's going to spit out wrong information. And so, it's not always going to be perfect. And that relates to point 3, which is overconfidence. And so you'll see these, if you could ask, how to use some software program, and ChatGPT will give you step-by-step of how to do something, and it will look great. And ChatGPT will say, yeah, this is how you do X, Y, and Z. If you actually try to follow those steps, you'll get to a point sometimes where there's a step that is impossible. It's not actually in the product that you're using. It's totally irrelevant, but it looks like it would be. And you'll rack your mind going crazy, being like, what? How can I not see how to do this? But it's purely making it up. It's taking all that information it's trained on to fill in the blanks with, for example, with that, if you're asking it for help on how to use a product, it has been trained on help guides for pretty much everything on the internet. And so if there's a gap in its knowledge, it's going to just take from its knowledge of how guides generally work, and it's going to try to fill in those blanks. When I was talking about the earlier model of Game of Thrones and minimizing how far off its predictions are, ultimately, with every prediction on the back end, the model's giving you kind of like a probability score of how right or wrong the information it's giving you is. ChatGPT doesn't expose that to you. So it could give you an answer, it looks super confident, but you're not seeing actually how confident or that prediction score is. You're not seeing those error bars. And so you gotta be aware of that. So, and then finally, inappropriate content. It's tough to control what it's gonna say. And so that makes applications a little tricky, because if you're gonna sell this to customers are obviously gonna want to make sure that, this is not going to offend their own customers. And so there's things you can do to put some guardrails around that, but there's always a risk that stuff filters through. Before we jump into just showing you what we're doing on our product, some current use cases. This is how you could use ChatGPT in your job today. One is coming up with ideas for activity programming. You go to ChatGPT and you could say, hey, I'm looking for an outdoor activity for the summertime. Give me a list of 10 ideas, and it'll be able to do that. It'll give you a list, and it could be very helpful. You could ask it, hey, what are some tips for engaging the less active residents of my community and getting them more involved? And they give you some great tips. You can have it edit emails that you're sending. And then you can use it for some learning or support and research, asking questions on, world events, historical events. And it generally will give you good answers, although there's always that risk that something might be a little off. They're called hallucinations, if you will. That's what they're called technically, but you just gotta be aware of that risk and check the information you get. Future applications, I think an exciting one, although again, you gotta get over those risks with the tech potentially saying something that you don't want to say, but virtual companionship, I think is a great use case for the senior. Someone, it can give them someone to interact with, to get information from. It can be very effective at that. Can also be used for helping them, obtain answers to more complex queries beyond just, a lot of tech now today. You could say, hey, what are the activities in the community? But this could go way beyond that, asking very specific details. If you train it on things related to your community, it could, if the senior's asking, where is this room? They could give them instructions or guides to get how to get to that room. And so there's a ton of stuff you can do with this. And I'm really excited about all the opportunity ahead. But with that, I want to just quickly show off. This is our first, we're doing a bunch of stuff, but this is the first thing that will be released. And it's pretty, say, a basic use case. So let me just share my other screen. Screen two. So this is the Communication 360 application, formerly VoiceFriend. And we added a thing in here called Smart Templates. And how it works is, you go to make your template. Let's get this. You go to add your content. There's a button now we call it Generate Smart Content. And so what you can do is, you create a message. Say I want to, send a nice message about July 4th holiday to my staff, family, and residents. I could say, message about July 4th. And you can wait, and it'll generate a message. I'll even put in the fields, so it'll customize to your community. So this one's a happy July 4th. It's a time to celebrate freedom and independence. Join us. So you can put your community's name for an amazing day of activities and fun. See you there. And you could, if you don't like that one, you click generate again. It'll generate you a variation, but again, see the hallucination. Added 6 p.m. tonight, there'll be fireworks. So that's the kind of thing where, it'll make stuff up, and you can't just use it out of the box. You gotta edit these before you use them. So that's text message. Email, since it's longer form content, it can get even more robust. So I can ask the same thing, write me a message about July 4th, and I hit generate. Give me a subject. It'll give me a lot longer of a message. Let's see what this one says. Come celebrate nation's independence, whether you're spending a day with family or friends, or enjoying a barbecue, or watching fireworks light up the sky. This is a time to come together as a community and celebrate what makes our country great. Lovely message. Can really help with coming up with these ideas. Sometimes it's hard to think of what's the right thing to say, but this is a super easy, takes almost instantaneous way to generate content to share with your community, your staff, your residents, your families, whoever that is. So that'll be out next month in Communication 360. But as you can see, simple application of ChatGPT and OpenAI, just a start for us. So a fun one indeed, and excited to get that out. But with that, I will wrap things up. Just shameless plug at the end. We're Icon. We're in over 2,000 communities, and we help with resident, staff, family satisfaction, engagement, and communication. 5 minutes left here. If there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. There'll also be a poll at the end about the presentation. Would very appreciate it if you could respond to the poll. But I'll have Meredith. Can you start the poll? If not already, perfect. Perfect. Again, any questions? Feel free to drop in the chat. Not a lot, no questions today. Interesting. Fantastic. Well, if there are no questions, I appreciate the responses we got. Until next month, I will see you all for now. Take care.